Hi there guys, and welcome to every episode of Family Guy Season 9 Reviewed. Despite me finding the last two seasons underwhelming, I am still intrigued to watch this one. I have been hearing different opinions from you guys in the comments. Some of you think it continues, like seasons 7 and 8, but a few of you seem to think that maybe it's a little step up. I hope it is, but I'll have to wait and see. Before we start though, as ever, I would like to thank everyone for their support with the channel, and if you haven't subscribed yet, I would very much appreciate you doing so. Basically, the more people that interact with these videos, share comments and so forth, the more enjoyment I get out of making these videos. Anyway, with that said, let's take a look at the episodes. Season 9, Episode 1. And then there were fewer. Everyone receives an invitation to a dinner party at a secluded mansion. However, a series of murders make it clear that one of them is a killer. My best cutaway was Herbert on methamphetamines, chasing the kids. And my best moment was the group chasing Tom Tucker around the table. The season opener gets a 5 out of 5. Perhaps the most obvious 5 to date. This is a fantastic episode. I remember liking it when I first saw it over a decade ago, and it seems like most people agree with me, as it is a very critically acclaimed episode. I did already cover it in my top 10 Family Guy episode list, which I did a few years back now, so I won't go over everything which happens in great detail, as I think most people probably already know it anyway, but I will try and explain why I think it works so well. It was very clever to trap all of the characters in this deserted mansion as this murder story was slowly developing. There was a great feeling of tension and stakes throughout, as the characters don't know which one of them is the killer. I think the fact that we rarely see these characters in a serious situation like this helps make it feel a bit more special, and more intriguing too. The way they all turn on each other and panic to try and find ways to find the killer really builds up the suspense. It seems they have solved it all when Tom Tucker is arrested after finding a body and a murder weapon in his room, but actually, Lois finds out it was Diane all along, who came up with this incredibly audacious yet cunning revenge scheme on James Woods and Tom Tucker. It didn't fully go to plan, however. That's why she had to kill more people than she wanted to. I think the revelation worked, not only for the sinister tone coming from Diane as she explains it to Lois, credit to the voice actress on that, but it also does allow the show to permanently kill off some characters who weren't getting used much. Even the twist ending of Stewie killing Diane before she could kill Lois worked very well for me. It wasn't only the engaging story which worked here though. For such an intense story, the jokes were also surprisingly funny. "It's you, the man or woman who's been killing everyone," is a line I found funny, as was Peter saying, "Is this what black people see all the time?" when the lights were off. As I said though, the Benny Hill-esque chase scene of them chasing Tom Tucker in circles, as well as the huddle Peter conducts to figure out how to catch him was great. Hey, it may be a more serious story, but you can still have some of the Family Guy wackiness mixed in. So yeah, this episode is a bit of a masterpiece really, one of Family Guy's best. Season 9, Episode 2, Excellence in Broadcasting. When Brian learns that Rush Limbaugh is at the Quahog Mall for a book signing, he goes down there to give him a piece of his mind. However, after reading his book, Brian is won over. My best cutaway was John McCain and Rush Limbaugh solving mysteries in a Scooby-Doo-esque fashion. My best moment was the Republican Town song. This one gets a 3 out of 5. I didn't know what to make of this really, which is why I settled on the middle of the road rating. It starts off with Brian being pretentious, but he soon comes around to Rush Limbaugh's way of thinking, after Rush saves him from an ass beating using some crazy fighting skills. I don't think Brian's character journey was interesting because it was made clear that he was only a Republican all of a sudden because he loves to be a contrarian. As the ending says, he never really believed any of it deep down, so because of that, I can't exactly say that any character growth occurred. I did at least like the end, with Brian and Rush insulting each other before giving a satisfied grin. They know this is how it's all meant to be. The satire here is nothing too crazy, it's mostly mocking conservatives, but there are a few jabs at liberals too, with some of the things Lois says. The jokes were not great overall, but there were a few good ones. As I said, the Scooby-Doo style show was kind of cool in a bizarre way. I also enjoyed Brian staring at the bag he was pretty sure had food in. You can never go wrong with him acting like a dog. The most memorable thing about the whole thing though was the musical number. It is enough to get this episode at least a 3. Season 9, Episode 3, Welcome Back, Carter. After Peter catches Carter having an affair, he blackmails him over it. My best cutaway was Carter describing French ambulances, and my best moment was Peter's slow Bird is a Word song. This one gets a 4 out of 5. The story here was alright. We got some flashbacks of how Babs met Carter, and honestly, him cheating on her is not exactly unexpected, given how poorly their marriage is often portrayed. The scene of Peter's ooze running out of letters as he finds out was good, and him using his knowledge of Carter's affair to blackmail him was also fine, but maybe went on a bit too long. I can forgive it though because it produced Carter going to France to lecture them not only about their movies, but also about their ambulance sirens, sounding like gay guys having a threesome. I love how that's just Carter venting his own opinions. Act 3 was not taken particularly seriously, from the casual way Peter spilled the beans, to Carter telling Babs to go to hell just as she was about to take him back. We also got Peter's ever so touching slow rendition of Bird is the Word. When you combine the decent plot with a number of other fine jokes like Diabito and the limo jousting, this ends up being above average. Season 9, Episode 4, Halloween on Spooner Street. Stewie doesn't know what Halloween is, so Brian tries to show him what it's all about. Meanwhile, as part of a yearly tradition, Peter and Joe pull pranks on Quagmire. My best cutaway here was Peter getting lost in the grocery store, and my best moment was Lois getting Stewie's candy back. The Halloween episode gets a 4 out of 5. This was solid enough given that there was 3 different stories going on, but much like the last episode, it's a good collection of jokes, which get this to a 4. Let's start off with Joe and Peter pranking Quagmire. It's fun to see how they get at him, with Joe somehow fooling him into thinking he was a woman, and Peter finding this African insect to bite him, because he already had all of the other known diseases. The way Quagmire gets his revenge, in the end, was also very dramatic, but in a fun way. It was a really well thought out plan to claim to have Japanese ancestors, obviously knowing there was an old Japanese World War II plane for him to fly. Then he takes them up into the air and almost kamikazes into the harbour. Quagmire is a skilled enough pilot to believe he could pull something like this off, and it certainly scared Peter and Joe, so I'm okay with how it went down. Just file that one under, it was just a prank, bro. The Meg subplot, where she unwittingly makes out with Chris, is the weakest of the 3, but it's not bad or anything, it's just kinda there. Stewie and Brian being picked on by the teenage bullies threw up some great moments. The Pink Panther cameo, after Brian was spray painted pink, was very nice, but the very best bit came at the end. I love how Lois went full psycho mode, and was not just satisfied getting the candy back, she demanded payment as well. The way she changed the $40 to $80 after the woman claimed she had no money made me chuckle. In terms of the cutaways, there were 2 great ones. Peter and Brian running into their mirror reflections was one, and Peter crying about losing Lois in the store was the other. I love how annoyed Lois was when she saw him, almost like this is a regular occurrence. Season 9, Episode 5, Baby You Knock Me Out. Peter pushes Lois into a career in boxing and becomes her manager. Soon, all of her wins attract the attention of the most dangerous female fighter, Deirdre Jackson. My best cutaway here was Peter feeling in control, burping in an underground parking place to assert his dominance. My best moment overall was Floyd Weatherton giving us his oh so coherent insight into the fight. This one gets a 5 out of 5 from me. So anyone who has seen my Home Alone 4 review for The Simpsons will know that I'm a sucker for boxing based episodes, and while I don't think this was quite as good as that one, it was still very enjoyable. Peter pressures Lois into becoming a boxer, so Lois uses her built up resentment of him to take it out on her opponents. It works quite well, I thought, especially as, contrary to what Brian said in this episode, Lois has always had this kind of violent streak in her. I mean, we just saw it in the last episode with the candy scene. Things end reasonably well too. The final fight with the killer woman is very dramatic, with Peter in particular getting in some great moments, like giving a speech in the wrong corner, or singing Eye of the Tiger. I wish Quagmire hadn't cut him off. I would have happily listened to a whole lot more of that. Other great moments include Cleveland's birthday card at the start. Him happily singing along to Hanson's and Bop is hilarious for some reason. Not so hilarious for him in the end though, sadly, as he gets chased down by the police. I also like how Peter can't resist opening the card back up. The parody of a disfigured, punch-drunk boxer was also great. Floyd's quotes really are words to live by, but his final one, "My Puerto Rican wife got fat," was the icing on the cake. In the end, this had a solid story, which I could get behind, combined with funny jokes. I kind of had to give this a 5. Season 9, Episode 6. Brian writes a bestseller. Brian writes a crappy self-help book titled Wish It, Want It, Do It. It becomes successful and Stewie becomes his manager. However, the fame soon gets to Brian and he takes it out on Stewie. My best cutaway, Brian is worse than that guy from Penguin Publishing. And my best moment was Brian on Bill Maher. So is Brian writing a successful book successful to me? No it's not. This gets a 1 out of 5. This is the first bad episode of the season, and boy was it a stinker. They may have been going for the Brian gets successful, then gets corrupted by fame angle, but it fails so hard for me, mainly because even from the start, there is not one thread of authenticity from Brian. He openly says he is writing a crap book on purpose, to try and make money and get famous. There is no character journey or anything. Once he actually gets his book published, in a rather unbelievable way, he becomes unbearable. The episode seems to think that Brian talking down to people and bullying Stewie non-stop is good comedy when it's anything but. I wanted to just reach through my screen and punch the douchebag, to be honest. The ending non-apology was a salt in the wound too. Can't Brian just admit he was wrong for once? Well, no is the answer. He's a dick right until the end. His appearance on Bill Maher was the only decent moment here, and even that was a bit dragged out. Season 9, Episode 7, Road to the North Pole. Stewie and Brian journey to the North Pole in order to kill Santa Claus, but they are shocked by what they see when they get there. My best cutaway was the angry complaint letters. After Stewie complains that the North Pole looks like Bridgeport, Connecticut. And my best moment here was the Christmas Time Is Killing Us song. This Christmas themed episode gets a 4 out of 5. This is the second double length episode of the season so far, and while this wasn't quite as good as the opener, it was still good. Right out of the gate they set up what the story will be about, with the All I Really Want for Christmas song. It's a catchy tune, and some of the townspeople's lyrics are funny. However, when Brian takes Stewie to the mall to meet Santa, things take a turn for the worse. Not only does Brian unwittingly insult Quagmire's niece who has cancer, Stewie gets pissed that Santa leaves without seeing him, so he decides he wants to kill Santa, and the road to the North Pole begins. Now, I will be honest, Stewie and Brian's trip to get there is the main reason this episode missed out on the full marks. It took up a third of the episode, which is a bit too long in my opinion. I just wanted to meet Santa already, but instead we spent a lot of time trekking around in the wilderness. Don't get me wrong, it wasn't awful. The Canadian man giving up his leg was a decent gag, as was the birds in the truck, in the V formation. I still think this section messed with the pacing a tad though. Once they actually got to the North Pole, the episode more than makes up for it. Seeing the absolute mess Santa is in, along with his inbred elves and mutant reindeers, the whole thing is a good analogy for how rampant the commercialism in Christmas has become. And in that sense, it also calls back to the song that kicked off the episode, with everyone selfishly wanting so much stuff. It also toys around with how impossible Santa's job would be if he was actually one person in real life. The rather dark song Christmas Time Is Killing Us captures the messed up vibe perfectly, and is another very well sung, well directed song, one of my favourites from the whole show. The final act of Stewie and Brian trying to do Santa's job was overly violent in typical Family Guy fashion, but hey, at least they got the message through in the end, and got everyone to stop being so selfish at Christmas time. It was a happy ending for Santa, which, to be honest, after everything which went on, was probably needed. There were a few other little moments in this, which I enjoyed, not so connected to the main story. Seth MacFarlane's dad, doing the live action segments, worked for me. They added something different, and weren't frequent enough to get annoying, and I did like the piss take of Bridgeport, Connecticut. I have no doubts the writers do receive those type of letters from time to time. Season 9, Episode 8, New Kidney in Town. Peter needs a new kidney after his energy drink addiction causes renal failure. Brian steps up to volunteer as a donor, despite knowing that the procedure will kill him. My best cutaway was the flower on Red Bull carjacking, and my best moment overall was Peter on Red Bull singing Ray of Light. I gave this one a 3 out of 5. The first act of this had Peter discovering Red Bull and getting super hyper on it. It was a fun time with him singing that Madonna song, Seth really showing off his high vocal range with that one. I also liked him bouncing Stewie on his knee, and of course the flower that comes to life and goes all GTA style on the guy. Things kind of get more serious in the second half. I say kind of because although Peter is dying and Brian volunteers to let himself die to save him, the episode still never treated it that seriously. Even the scene when Stewie is telling Brian not to do it, he's there snotty crying all over him. It's hard to say whether this would have worked better if they played it fully straight, because often Family Guy isn't cut out for that kind of thing anyway. And given that it's Dr. Hartman of all people, trying to transplant a dog's kidney into a human being, I don't see how you can really play that straight. Still though, it's the thought that counts, and it was nice to see Brian step up, even when it was Peter who got himself into that situation in the first place. I don't know about this one overall, it's a bit of a weird one for me. A part of me thinks this episode did have some untapped potential, but another part of me is just thankful that they never screwed it up and made a complete mess of it. Season 9, Episode 9, And I'm Joyce Kinney. Lois becomes friends with local news anchor Joyce Kinney. However, Joyce ends up betraying her by exposing that Lois was in a pornographic movie when she was younger. My favourite cutaway and moment here were the same thing, which was Lois puking on Stewie in a drunken mishap. This one gets a 4 out of 5 from me. So I guess I should say at the start that I'm not a massive fan of Joyce as the newswoman presenter. She's very bland and doesn't have anywhere near the presence that Diane had. It's no surprise that this is the only real spotlight episode she ever gets on the show, so the fact that this episode could overcome that obstacle and still be entertaining to me is all the more impressive. The actual plot was average at best. Lois and Joyce strike up a fake friendship until Joyce betrays her and exposes that she was in a porno when she was younger. The town judges her for a while, until Lois shows the whole town in church the video. That was kind of questionable, but I do at least think the general message is a good one. I'm a big believer in not letting other people's opinions get you down. They want to judge you and be mean to you, it's up to them. But as Brian said, they only have power over you if you let them. If you are comfortable with who you are, then the opinions of some random people on the street shouldn't bother you in the slightest. The main reason it's got a 4 though was frankly the cutaways. There were only 7 of them, but it was truly a great collection. Peter trying and failing to give Consuela a number was great. I like how Consuela seems to be the only one who can get Peter to look like a normal human being. The ending to Grease was pretty funny, as was the guillotine, which didn't work half the time. Lois playing with Stewie only to be sick all over him is a classic though. It's Stewie's reaction that sells it, flopping around like a fish out of water. He looked like Magikarp from Pokemon. So yeah, this ended up being surprisingly enjoyable. Season 9, Episode 10, Friends of Peter G. After causing a drunken scene at the Quahog Cinema, Peter and Brian are forced to join Alcoholics Anonymous. My best cutaway for this one was Peter and the guys driving the car drunk at the water park. And my best moment was the studio logos before the movie. This one gets a 3 out of 5. As far as Peter and Brian getting drunk and acting like idiots goes, this was solid enough. At first I thought they would go deep into the AA stuff, but it was literally one boring scene, and then Peter and Brian making mockery of the whole thing by bringing booze to the meetings, which of course none of the recovering alcoholics were able to resist. But there were at least a few okay moments to come from it. It was good to see Bruce as the host, and the Mr. Booze song was decent. The final act of Peter dying in a car accident and getting shown the way of moderation by death was again fine, but like most of the episode, it never had much weight behind it. My 2 favourite jokes were a drunk Peter driving his car down a water slide. I like how the kid still comes down after him anyway and ends up hitting the car. But the scene before the movie with all the misleading logos was fantastic. It's very relatable and you're left laughing at Peter's annoyance as it happens. Season 9, Episode 11, German Guy. Chris's search for a new hobby leads him to befriend an old puppeteer who turns out to be a former Nazi. My best cutaway out of the 2 that were here, prostitution is legal under certain conditions. Got to make sure you film it, then it's art. My best moment was Chris inexplicably not being able to tell a difference between Peter and Franz. I gave this one a 2 out of 5. This felt like it was being dragged on at such a slow pace that although there was a kidnapping and all sorts like that going on, it actually felt like nothing actually happened. Chris meets this old German guy who is a puppeteer, and Herbert starts feeling jealous about it, and of course makes a claim that Franz is a Nazi. Only it turns out that Herbert's flashback was actually correct, and the old geezer was a Nazi, or is still a Nazi I guess. Chris and Peter eventually find this out, but soon get themselves held captive, in the goofiest way possible. I will admit, I did find it funny how stupid Chris was in mixing up Peter and Franz. Peter's bewilderment, we didn't even trade places, we don't even look the same. I found that really funny for some reason. Again though, given that Peter and Chris themselves didn't take the whole situation seriously, preferring to insult Meg rather than ask her for a way out, it's hard to really care about anything that's going on. The whole thing gets sorted in the slowest fight of all time between Herbert and Franz. That was kinda funny for a while, but it did go on a tad too long in my opinion. And the ending was, I guess, a happy one, but of course, given that Herbert is a paedophile, it's hard to have any kind of sympathy or happiness on his behalf. So yeah, a weird one for me, but ultimately it wasn't funny enough to be better. Season 9, Episode 12, The Hand That Rocks the Wheelchair. Meg offers to check on Joe while Bonnie is out of town, but when he treats her well, she soon becomes obsessive of him. The best cutaway here for me was Peter's prank call on Joe, and the best moment overall was the final fight between Stewie and Evil Stewie. I gave this one a 2 out of 5. This was an episode full of potential and interesting premises, marred by poor execution. The plot of Meg getting a crush on Joe because he actually treats her reasonably is interesting. I would have liked for them to develop a friendship in a healthy, realistic way. That could have even been something which carried over forward after this episode. But God forbid something like that could ever happen. As is always the case with Meg, when someone is nice to her, she gets carried away with it and has to take things in a creepy direction. It's so off-putting and ruins any chance the story had. As for the subplot, I like how Brian has brought up that Stewie has been getting softer over time. He definitely has. This could have been used as a vehicle for really getting into Stewie's psyche and his perspective on things. What does he actually want to be? Is he happy being evil? Or is he happier the way he is now? We never get that insight though. Instead, he unknowingly creates a super evil clone of himself. Nothing much came of it, except a bunch of scenes of evil Stewie violently killing people. Still, the final fight scene was decent, as was the weird ending of the Michael Jackson Thriller eyes. Still, this was not the funniest episode, so that combined with my annoyances condemned this to a 2. Season 9, Episode 13, Trading Places. After the kids wreck Peter's bike, Chris, Meg, Peter and Lois all trade places and try and show who has it harder. My favourite cutaway was Peter's old job as a police sketch artist. You can see exactly what type of sketches he conjured up in that picture on the right there. And my best moment was Peter doing the USA national anthem on his dirt bike. This one continues the run of 2 out of 5s. The whole thing of the adults switching places with the kids is a bit cliche, and honestly this episode never did much to make it interesting. At first it was all about showing how much easier Chris and Meg have it when they're adults, while Peter and Lois are struggling at school. But the tone changes massively when Chris starts getting stressed out. The pressure of work ends up getting to him, and he starts lashing out at everyone. It even gets to the point of him having a heart attack. As you might imagine, none of it is pleasant viewing. It all feels a bit too uncomfortable for me to get behind, to be honest. The hand on the dirt bike intro went on for too long, especially the scene with Carter destroying the park bench. It went on for a good minute and a half, and was never funny to begin with. At least there were 2 moments here I found funny, which saved this from being a 1. One was Peter's dirt bike rendition of Star Spangled Banner. Honestly, it was probably better than a lot of national anthem performances at sports games. I also liked Peter's drawing as a police sketch artist. I even knew that something like that was coming as the punchline, but I still never expected the drawing to be as over-the-top, stereotypically racist as it was. Season 9, Episode 14, Tiegs for 2. Peter thinks the local dry cleaner has stolen his favourite white shirt. Meanwhile, Brian and Quagmire compete for the affections of each other's old flames. My best cutaway here was Brian saying Quagmire thinks he knows everything, like a black woman in hindsight. And my best moment was the Street Fighter type showdown between Peter and Mr. Washy Washy. This one gets a 3 out of 5. So the actual core of this I wasn't a fan of. It was Brian going to Quagmire's sleazy class on how to pick up women. I'm not sure why Brian even needs to go to those type of classes. That part didn't really make much sense. But once he does attend it, he ends up getting horrible advice, and the whole thing devolves into a bitter back and forth revenge mission between them. They both end up dating the person the other really wants, and they end up making a total fool of themselves. And just when you think they may be warming to each other, Quagmire drives away, leaving Brian in the dust. None of it was enjoyable to watch. The reason this still ends up being a decent episode is that the first 5 or 6 minutes with Mr. Washy Washy were great. The whole scene at the dry cleaning store was funny as hell. The whole Bing Bong fiasco with the door as well as the argument they have. You get out my store, you give me shirt. I love how quick and back and forth their insults and responses were. The Street Fighter parody, which settles it all, was also brilliant. So accurate to the original game. All the different animations and movements were spot on. And as someone who actually played that game when I was younger, it was very nostalgic for me. Seeing the E-Honda moves and Stadium and Peter's voice lines as he delivers Ryu/Ken's moves are fantastic. There were a few good cutaways too. I liked the Transformer Negatron. Just the contrast of Frank Welker's Megatron with Negatron's mundane voice is what sells it for me. The Black Woman in hindsight is also a guilty pleasure joke of mine. For me, it's always the subtleties which sell these gags. With this one, it's the woman's neck movements. Season 9, Episode 15, Brothers and Sisters. After her 9th husband leaves her, a depressed Carol comes to stay with the Griffins. She meets Mayor Adam West, and they become close. So close that they decide to get married. My best cutaway and best moment was, "Men, we don't know what we did." It's one of those classic Family Guy jingles that's become a bit iconic and a bit of a meme, and I'm sure it's very relatable for a lot of men too. I gave this one a 4 out of 5. So to talk a bit about the story, it was simple but solid. Lois's sister, Carol, after having loads of failed marriages in the past, gets with Mayor West, in the hope of finally making one work. To be honest, neither Carol or Lois come off as sensible here, and clearly Mayor West isn't sensible, is he? So essentially you know it's a bit of a mess. But Carol seems nice enough, and Mayor West is always fun, so you kind of want to get on their side anyway. I was kind of happy they did end up together, although like always, the show never really does anything with their relationship in the future. Most of the jokes here work on some level or another. My favourite one you already know, but I'll share a few others I liked. Quagmire slowly putting the suitcases down and getting in a taxi to take him a few feet up the road after Carol went on and on about how bad men are, I found funny. Peter and Mayor West playing together as brothers was also quite endearing. Also, Peter having to deal with these exotic fish after he was gifted them was bizarre enough to be funny. They will take care of him in old age after all. So yeah, the best way I can describe this is just solid all the way through. Season 9, Episode 16, The Big Bang Theory. Stewie and Brian go back in time to stop Bertram's plan of killing Leonardo da Vinci, which will erase Stewie from the universe. My best cutaway was the ground controller having the last word over Neil Armstrong during the moon landing. And my best moment overall was the battle between Stewie and Bertram on their flying machines. I gave this one a 3 out of 5. It was about time they brought up Stewie's time machine again, and this was an episode which did just that. Although at the start, I was kind of expecting to like this one more than I did. I don't know, I just didn't feel the excitement from this one, and cleverness that some of the others did, like Road to the Multiverse for example, probably because there wasn't as many funny or memorable gags. Don't get me wrong, this was still okay. Having Bertram as the villain again was nice, especially with the whole showdown in Italy, and the revelation that Da Vinci was Stewie's ancestor. That was a decent payoff to the whole destruction of the universe threat going on in the background. Most people I assume will like this a bit more than me, probably for good reason. I just regrettably find it hard to get very enthusiastic for this one, which is probably why my review of it is so brief. Season 9, Episode 17, Foreign Affairs. When Bonnie and Lois take a trip to Paris, Bonnie confesses to Lois that she is there to have an affair, and once again we have a moment doubling up as the best cutaway and overall moment. And that was Joe singing the American Dad theme song. This one gets a 2 out of 5. The Lois and Bonnie trip to France wasn't up to much. The only thing I liked about it was the scene of Lois and Bonnie as Muppets, seeing the sights of Paris. The rest of the time was devoted to Bonnie trying to cheat on Joe. All that entailed was Lois and Bonnie sitting around, talking until random French men approached them. It was such a bore. We already know by this point in this show that Joe and Bonnie's relationship is in the toilet, and will only get worse from here. That Wiley ending, where they go back to Quahog together, never had any impact at all for me. The side plot of Peter homeschooling Chris and Meg had some potential, and there were a few good moments at the start. However, filler soon crept in. The whole music video they play is even more egregious than the Conway Twitty one. At least that one had a bit of charm. This was just straight up annoying. In terms of the jokes, they were okay. I liked Jafar filling out the census. It's not quite as good as him at the eye doctor, but it's still good. As well as Peter being surprised at the math teachers and driving instructors' races. The cutaway of Joe singing Good Morning USA was the best thing here, full stop though. We all know Joe and Stan kind of look like each other, so having Joe belt out the theme song was something I'm glad happened at some point. It's not enough to get this episode a passing grade though. Season 9, Episode 18, It's a Trap. After the power goes out for the third time at the Griffin's house, Peter retells the story of Return of the Jedi. My best cutaway was the Hands Job commercial, and Darth Vader Stewie making fun of Seth Green in front of Chris was my favourite moment. The season finale gets a 3 out of 5. This is the third hour-long Star Wars special the show has done, and if you believe the intro, the staff didn't even want to do it, but Fox made them. Now I know that was meant to be a joke, but a lot of truth is said in jest, and I think it's telling that there was never another Star Wars special after this. Despite all of this, what did I think of the actual program? Well, much like the movie, which it parodied, it wasn't quite as good as the previous one. It was still fine, just the weakest of the 3 Star Wars specials. They seem to take everything less seriously here, like the fight scenes for example were often interrupted or finished by some random nonsense, and there was joke after joke about the stormtroopers being incredibly incompetent. Because of this, it's hard to get invested in the drama and stakes of the whole thing, but there was still just enough good moments over the course of the episode to keep this watchable over the entire runtime. I liked the machine version of Consuela refusing to open the door. The Hands Job was also a very good pun. I also found it fitting how Carter, as the Emperor, got carried away with his lightning finger powers. The best moment in the episode for me was all the fourth wall breaking about Seth Green and Seth MacFarlane. They clearly aren't afraid to make fun of themselves. I did appreciate the little touch of how all the characters jump in to defend the guy they are voiced by. This ended up being an okay end to the season. So that's all the episodes done, and here is the Family Guy Season 9 summary. Once the ratings were averaged out, the average score for the season was 3.16. And as you can see by the chart there, it is a slight improvement over the previous 2. I'll discuss it more in a minute. In terms of my least favourite episodes, the bottom 5 were German Guy at 5, The Hand That Rocks a Wheelchair at 4, Foreign Affairs at 3, Trading Places at 2, and Brian Writes a Bestseller was the only 1 out of 5 episode. My top 5 were Brothers and Sisters at 5, Halloween on Spooner Street at 4, Road to the North Pole at 3, and the 2 5 out of 5s were Baby You Knock Me Out at 2, and then there were fewer at 1, and that was a clear number 1. Although they are both rated as a 5, and then there were fewer is like a top tier 5 rated episode. So, as I touched on earlier, this ranks as an average season for me, a slight improvement over the previous 2, but that hardly tells the full story. The true breakdown for this season is that the first half is good and the second bad. In fact, the difference in quality between the first and second half was so noticeable that I actually worked out the score for both halves, and the first half was an entire point better, 3.6 compared to 2.6. This season was just really front loaded with experimental and just plain good episodes. Obviously, and then there were fewer is an all-time classic, but I also loved the boxing episode, the Road to episode was very creative, and in general things just felt much funnier. I don't know, as the season went on, things just started to feel a little more lazy. Please let me know your take on this season because I know it's one people have a lot of different opinions about. Honestly though, if the rest of HD Family Guy keeps up this level, with the odd iconic moment and great episode, I'll take it, to be honest. Anyway, that's all in the future. For now, I'll sign off for this video. Thanks as always for your support, guys, and take care.